All right. So here's the sort of bad news. So let's say somehow you figure out this great way to sample and you avoid size bias and voluntary response bias and you're not convenient sampling and you didn't necessarily use expert, judgments and you didn't, and you had a big enough sampling pool, right? Sampling frame. You could still have bias in your data. Right? It's sort of crazy because even though you might try your hardest to avoid all of those things, you might still have bias because of bad data collection methods. And once again, by bad, I'm going to put bad in quotes because it's going to make it systematically biased, but it's not that these are not common. They're actually quite common. So the first kind of bad data collection bias comes from what's called non-response bias. Remember, a lot of studies are voluntary, and so some people may just not want to participate. They might not volunteer. They might decline being part of your sample. And so those people who choose not to respond, you don't have data on them, but they might be very important to the population. They are systematically not represented in the population. So the non-response bias is sort of, you could think of it as the who bias. This is you systematically avoid in your sample. So the sample is missing the people who don't want to respond, who don't respond for whatever reason. So for instance, in that case where you email out a survey, those people who don't respond, let's say even though you emailed out the survey to a perfectly representative group of people, the people who choose not to finish the survey, you're not going to have data for them. Or let's say you want to do a study on whether teachers, where their methods of, whether their teaching methods change over time, and you want to go into teachers' classrooms, but you have to have their permission. Now, the teachers who choose not to participate in your study, we don't know about their behavior. We don't know about their teaching methods. And who knows why they don't want to participate. Maybe they're such awesome teachers. They just really want to focus on their students. Or maybe they're terrible and they're ashamed. And so they would not want anybody going in there and watching them, right? So you never know. And those non-responses are actually skewing your data. The other sort of bad data collection method is bias from bad data collection method is what we call a questionnaire bias. Now, questionnaire bias is very, very broad. And this is sort of what I think of as the how bias. Because the way you word something, the way you word a question, the way you word, the tone of voice that you ask, the context in which you ask, the order of questions. All of these things affect the answer. These things affect right? And so because of that, it's very, very hard to avoid the questionnaire bias. All of these tiny, tiny little variables actually might affect the way that your data is collected, the kind of data that gets collected. Let me just give you an example. So this is a sort of famous example by Amos Tversky, a Nobel Prize-winning economist and behavioral psychologist, behavioral economist, sorry. He asked people, Kahneman and Tversky asked people these two questions. Basically, in one situation, they said, okay, I want you to tell me which one of these things you're going to choose. It's a game, right? First, I'm going to give you $100. Okay? So boom, I give you $100. Good game, right? Already a good game. Now, then I'm going to give you a risky choice versus a safe choice. Okay? And I want you to tell me which of these two choices that you want to take with your $100. So one is take a risk. You flip a coin. If you get heads, I'll give you another. If you get heads, you lose nothing. Let's say, but if you get tails, you lose that $100. Sucks to be you, right? So that's the risky choice. The safe choice is this. I'll just give you $50. No no tail flipping, no coin flipping, nothing. Which one would you choose? Now, people obviously choose this option, right? Because it's like, what? I can lose money, or you just give me $50? For sure, I'm just gonna get the $50, right? Okay, sounds reasonable. But let's say I ask the question slightly differently. Here's $200 now. I'm gonna give you $200. The risky choice remains the same. Heads, you lose nothing. Tails, you lose $100. So it's like, okay, doesn't sound like a great choice, right? But what is the safe option this time? Well, now the safe option is you lose $50. Right? Okay. Let's think about this for a second. A lot of people would say, I'm going to go with this option, right? But let's think. In the first game, if you got $100, right, and then I gave you $50, you would end up with $150 here, right? Those are your choices. That's your choice, right? And here you have a chance of losing 0 or losing 100, right? But here, if I play it safe, I will still end up with $150, right? Yet all of a sudden, this option looks so terrible compared to this one, and the same choice, mind you, whereas this option looks really, really good compared to this one, right? So Kahneman and Tversky, one of the things they found is that one thing is people are really sensitive to this framing in terms of losses. Starting with $200 and going down to $150 is a lot worse than starting with $100 and going up to $150, even though the $150 is exactly the same, right? So people are very, very loss averse. The second thing is that people are more likely to take risks when you frame things in terms of losses, right? All of a sudden, risk sounds pretty good to us. But if you frame things in terms of gains, then risk sounds terrible, and we'd rather have the safer option. Now, what they've done is that they've shown this with saving lives, saving the environment, like all kinds of stuff. People make choices differently when you frame the question in terms of losses or in terms of gains, in terms of risks or in terms of safety, right? So all of those things play a role. So this is just a small example, but you could sort of see like, oh, wow, like every question that we word, we have all kinds of choices in how we ask it. We could ask people, are you feeling anxious? Rate on a scale of 1 to 4. Or we could ask the exact opposite. Are you feeling calm, right? And so we could ask either one of those and sort of get to the same sort of idea that we wanted to get to. So how do you choose? So those are questionnaire biases when we have bad data collection methods. All right, so the final bias from bad data collection is when we have incorrect responses or measurement bias. So incorrect responses, I mean, that's pretty straightforward, but it's also sort of unavoidable. These are things like maybe you ask people a question and they have incorrect memories. Or maybe sometimes they straight up lie, right? nothing says that people can't lie to you, right? So maybe people will be like, oh, did you vote in the last election, right? Maybe somebody asked that on a survey. Maybe people are like, oh, I didn't, but I had thoughts about it. So that's sort of like voting. Or my candidate won anyway, so it's like I voted, right? So maybe they might just check off yes, right? Or maybe you might ask them, oh, did you follow the doctor's instruction since the last time, last doctor's visit? And people might look back and say, I didn't do it every day, but I did it like twice, right? Sure, yes, I followed all the doctor's instructions, right? So people might be well-meaning and still end up having an incorrect response. Or they might be genuinely trying to remember, did I do that? I don't know, maybe, yeah, I think I did. And they might just convince themselves that they did do it, right? So incorrect responses have a lot of, different sources, but they're unavoidable. Well, they're very hard to avoid anyway. The other thing is measurement bias. Maybe something about the way you're measuring it is wrong. For instance, let's say you wanted to measure people's heights, but your ruler is sort of worn down on one side, right? Then your measurement tool is already sort of off, right? So maybe you're collecting people's times on a stopwatch, but your stopwatch is sort of off, right? So things like that might make it problematic for you. Actual measuring tool is off, right? So these are all kinds of biases that might come from bad data collection methods. And by bad, I just mean that they result in systematic bias. Although there are going to be ways that we can try to mediate some of these things. We could try to build in some checks and balances. We could do a lot of other things. A lot of these times, these biases, even though we try as best we can, they don't completely go away. They're always sort of there, lurking in the background. And whenever you read a study, you want to sort of watch out for these different biases.